Anyway, welcome everybody. I will just admit people in as we go along. So for those who I've not met, my name is Lori Cohen. I'm the director of the Beagle Alliance. My colleague, Mary Rescue and Volunteer Director, Mary Pryor, is here as well. And of course, we are welcoming Maddie Krasno, who is our guest. And as usual, this will be pretty casual and we'll go along. And if you want to, I always kind of forget this myself, is that if you'd like to ask a question, I will keep my eye on the screen. And if you want to just use your reaction button at the bottom of your Zoom and put your hand up, great. But honestly, if you physically go like this, I'll probably notice as well. Either way. Anyway, welcome, Maddie. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. So Maddie has a master's degree in humane education. She has a bachelor's degree in zoology and child development. And of course, what we're going to hear about mostly, I think, today is when she was an animal caretaker at the University of Wisconsin in the primate research facility. So this is really fascinating because hey, Kathy.
Well, I just want to know which, or maybe you can't say, but which location in Wisconsin?
Oh, Harlow.
Okay.
Primate lab.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so I'm just watching to admit people as we go along. So I'm going to share a screen with you, Maddie, and we'll get started.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Let's see.
You should be able to. I'm not A1 with Zoom, but yeah, cool.
We're good.
Awesome.
All right. Awesome. So yeah, and feel free. I can't see everyone while I'm presenting, but yeah, if someone wants to interrupt me if I don't see something, that's all right. So, and yeah, so I'm totally flexible in terms of this taking a complete different direction than what is laid out in these slides. But I figured that this could just kind of give us some sort of outline as to what I'm going to share with you today. So, yeah, as Lori said, my name's Maddie. I was a former animal caretaker at UW-Madison's Harlow Primate Lab. And so I'll kind of start this off by just sharing a little bit about my story and how I came to end up working in a research laboratory, which has a lot to do with how much I looked up to this woman, Jane Goodall. So when I was in college, started college in 2009, and I had started by immediately declaring a major in child development, and was always interested in doing things with animals, but I feared the sciences. I didn't think of myself as being smart enough to handle them. And so I just so happened to be taking a course called Animal Behavior, the Primates, to satisfy a science credit. And it was that course that ultimately kind of put me back on track of pursuing something related to what, Jane Goodall does, which is primate conservation. And this course was actually taught by the then director of the Harlow Primate Lab. Which is interesting to think about because as I reflect on that class, I really don't remember a lot of it having to do with animal testing. It was really about building an appreciation and respect for all of the different species of primates. And so it really didn't prepare me at all for what I, was getting myself into. But ultimately what happened is that I don't know, towards the end of the class, the professor had put up a slide that showed one of his former students working with Jane Goodall. And I was like, all right, why can't that be me? I'm the one stopping me from doing this. And so I ended up after that declaring zoology as a double major, dealing with the fact that I had to take chemistry and physics and ecology and biology in order to take like these like human animal relationships classes and like the ones I was really passionate about. And I also decided that, you know, it would make sense for me to get experience with primates right then if I could. And I really didn't know anything about animal testing. I was an animal lover, like many animal lovers who ate animals and did things that exploited animals and, you know, just hadn't thought deeply about these things. So my sophomore year of college, I you know, was sitting around waiting for a job opening. And when there was one, I applied. And so I was a student caretaker at the Harlow Primate Lab for a little over 2 years, spring of 2011 to spring of 2013. And that was a pretty eye-opening experience, to say the least. As I said, I really didn't know what I was getting myself into. I knew, you know, that there were monkeys inside, but I didn't know like what their conditions were really like, what it would do to my own psyche to be involved in it. This image is really like pretty accurate of what life was like for these animals. Some of them lived in like one of these like sets of 2 cages, but like without a divider. So instead of like, these are all singly housed monkeys, but some would be like in shared housing. There was one room in the building that had groups of individuals that like in the sense of like a breeder male, some females, the females might be having babies. And then the only other kind of like group housing would be when the like a group of like several babies who had been taken from their mothers. And so like the youth would be housed together in groups until they got bigger. But for the most part, you were seeing them either singly housed or like with one other monkey in this type of situation. And generally speaking, like my job was about 10 to 15 hours per week over the course of these 2-ish years. And most of those hours were every other weekend, because basically there were 4 or 5 student caretakers who like did enrichment stuff during the week for the most part, and other tasks around the lab, like filling guard stations and laundry and paperwork and just like cleaning. And when I say enrichment, I mean like they would get like ice, so like flavored ice, like it would be flavored with like Kool-Aid, and we put like something that sinks like beans and something that floats like crackers, and then that would be like one of the forms of enrichment they'd get. Another form would be like a quarter of an apple. Like it's really quite a joke. None of it lasted them very long. It was really, I mean, I laugh because I don't know what else to do at this point. When I think back to it, it's such a joke. It's such a far, like, it's so far from what their like natural lives would be. So anyway, that's like the one part of the job. But the other part was that on the weekends, 2 student caretakers were responsible for the health checks, feeding, cleaning of the 500 plus monkey, you know, cages, housing. So it would pretty much be the 2 of us, like, you know, two student caretakers on a weekend responsible for all of these monkeys. And that's really when like a lot of the things that I do remember would happen, because that was when we were working more closely with the monkeys. That's when, you know, I was most traumatized. There is a lot that I don't remember from my time. I had done a really great job of suppressing my memories and dissociating as a result of this. I'll talk in a little bit about it, but basically I was diagnosed with PTSD. And so there's certain memories that are like clear as day. And then there's other things that it's just like over the course of 2 years, you'd think that there'd be more, but I emotionally shut down, and in order to kind of protect myself. And so I'll share a couple of the, I guess, most distinct memories that I have to give you an idea of what, you know, what it was like as a caretaker, what it was like for these individuals. There's obviously a lot that I could talk about, but these are kind of two of those stories that I think give a pretty good example of just how sort of bare and really unnatural their lives were. And you're seeing right here, one of the things that I've done is been collaborating with some artists who helped bring to life some of the memories that I have, because I didn't ever take pictures. I was a very obedient, to the books rule follower. I was never gonna like try to like break a rule or do anything. I really wanted to kind of please authority. And so it was kind of this internal battle, like throughout the time of just like, do I like, something might feel wrong, but then like, you know, people of authority are telling me that this is right. And so it was really quite difficult. But anyway, all that being said, I didn't ever try to take a photo or take videos. But fortunately, I've had a couple artist friends who have helped me kind of paint these pictures. So this right here is Cheerio. I gave him the name Cheerio. He would have had 2 letters, 2 numbers as his actual name. So like BC60 or something like that. And with him, it was a little before New Year's, leading up to New Year's. And he was a monkey. He was about a year old, I would say. He was like a younger macaque, not a newborn, but a juvenile. And he was in our infirmary, which was like an area where you can like more closely monitor an animal if they're having health issues. And specifically, like you can have them on like a food log, so tracking like what they're eating. With him, he was like really like what you're seeing here is what I was seeing. For some reason, he didn't really have control of his limbs. So he was sort of just like lying on the bottom of his cage, and he couldn't pick up food to eat it. Like in order to eat it, he'd have to like bend down with his head. And so I would feed him Cheerios, as well as other food, but he was very into the sugary cereal. And he was, even though like the rest of his body, something was going on, and wasn't, you know, working for him, he was super like kind of just like lit up, alive, like so much life in his eyes, really eager for the food that we were hand giving him. Something I would never do with macaques, by the way. Like macaques are super aggressive animals. Like this is not something you would do with most of them. But in his situation, he, you know, this was the way he was going to get fed, and he knew that, and he, you know, developed that trust, and we did too. So I just like to point that out there, that I'd get people all the time who'd be like, your job is so awesome, you get to play with monkeys. And it's like, no, that's not what I'm doing. And I wouldn't want to be playing with them. A lot of them are not very happy with us. So anyway, the vet couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. And so that weekend, it was New Year's Eve, I think. And it was decided that he would be euthanized. And I was really frustrated. I didn't express this because I was terrified to express anything that made me sound like an animal activist. I didn't even identify as an animal activist at that point. Like I didn't, I had this like idea of what they were. And, when you're in this environment that you have to be careful, and so even though like, a sanctuary or somewhere else would have invested more in trying to help him and trying to work with his disability, it's cheaper for the labs to just euthanize them. They are disposable. And so I, along with my coworker, were asked to assist with the euthanasia. And so again, this was a weekend and the vet came in. So it was the three of us, and we had brought him over to this like sterile metal table, and the vet was like, can you help secure him? And it was like, like, have you seen this monkey? He doesn't really need securing, but Anyway, my coworker had like one of his arms and legs kind of held down, and the vet had his other leg for the injection, and I was just holding his hand because he wasn't trying. I mean, his eyes, they were full of life, and you know, I literally stared into them as the light faded from his eyes, and it was heartbreaking, because it's just like, what right do we have to make this decision? To say that like his life is meaningless because of his disability. Not to say that living in the lab is like a great alternative, but it's just like, it was one of those where, yeah, it kind of rocked my world a little bit. And I was all garbed up. So to this day, I don't know if the vet or my coworker knew that I was crying. But yeah, that was Cheerio. And then the other story that has really stuck with me is about a mother monkey. And she was in the one room of group housing. And so there was like one big breeder male is what they're called. And then there were some other females. There might be like younger males, but basically it was like the most natural in terms of a social group that could exist. There are about, I think, 6 or 7 of these cages, like out of the 500 monkeys. So it's like really small amount. And it's still like this, it's basically like a giant version of a stark barren cage, where lighting was usually horrible. There was usually like the clogged drains and stuff. Like it was gross, but at least there was like more of a normal social group. So anyway, this was another weekend. I had gone in to do health checks and feed, and discovered that one of the mothers, or one of the female monkeys, was carrying a dead baby. And we don't know whether or not the baby was born, had been dead when they were born, or if the baby had died, at some point between birth and then. But the baby was completely limp. So it was like very clear when I saw her, what was going on. And so I let my boss know, and she had said that if she was still carrying, like, we needed to remove the baby. So if she was still carrying the baby, as opposed to having set her down, the next day we would need to remove her. And so when we came in on Sunday, she was still carrying her baby. And so me and my coworker had to figure out how to get this baby from her. And so we use carrying cages to transport the monkeys, which are basically like these silver boxes with tiny little holes that they can see through. And so my coworker had put one up to like an opening in the cage, but then because there were so many other monkeys, like we decided that I needed to go into the main cage to try to kind of get her scared enough to go through the other way. I don't know, at the time I was just like, this is my job, this is fine. But the reality is that is really dangerous. And I don't know, again, this was me like thinking like, this is my job, I obey authority, and this is what I should do, when the logical person would be like, you could get herpes B and die, or like they could literally come at you and rip you apart. I mean, they've got teeth that you can see. This is a really nice representation of, macaques, how strong they are, how powerful they are. Fortunately, they were more afraid of me, or at least equally afraid of me as I was of them. And the mother monkey did go into the carrying cage. So then we took her to what is called a tabletop restraint, but really what we call a squeeze. And it's like this kind of like thing. It looks like this. And then like you can basically tighten it so that it's like sort of like these like teeth that hold the monkey still, so that like if you needed to give them a shot, you can like more easily secure them, hopefully. It's not foolproof. I got bit once, and I would have had part of my finger removed had I not had a leather glove on. So Anyway, that is what we had brought her to, not so much to secure her, but to just be able to open the carrying cage and have her come out and be closer to us, but like within that squeeze. And then I was giving her, I was taking pieces of marshmallow, which were one of their favorite snacks. Well, like treats, something we would put a medication in. And I was putting it down in the squeeze, and then she would come out holding her baby, take the marshmallow, eat it, you know, go back in the cage. And so this happened a few times. And then the last time I put it down, she came out, she put her baby down, put her lips to the baby's forehead, and then went back into the carrying cage without her baby and without the marshmallow. So it was in that instant that I realized that she really knew exactly what we were doing. She knew exactly what was going to happen. She knew the baby was going to be taken from her. And it just, again, was like broke me. I mean, it really felt like, you know, she was saying goodbye to her kid. And my coworker took her back to the cage, and I had to pick her baby up and put him in a plastic bag and into the freezer. So those are a couple of my more prominent memories. I can definitely elaborate more later on if you want to hear more. But I will talk a little bit more about the, you know, mental health implications, what sort of resulted for me from all of this, because I think it's something that is not talked about enough. And there's a lot of people working in animal research labs. And frankly, I think that this work should be considered inherently traumatic and treated as such. But unfortunately, it's not. That's normalized violence. So, Maddie,
do you mind
sorry.
if I interrupt?
Yeah, totally.
Just at this point,
Mhm.
and thank you for all of that, because clearly it's still traumatizing for you, and I can relate to the fact that you have certain memories and then not so certain memories. So just in terms of the logistics, so 500 and then 2 of you on the weekends, I'm guessing with no supervisor. Like, I'm trying to think about, because it's true, it is inherently dangerous and traumatizing. And when I think of jobs like that, I think of police and corrections, in which I was in, and they've been and of course anything in law enforcement, which now has been acknowledged as traumatizing in general and day-to-day traumatizing. And so, like, no protocols for any of this, and no supervisor calling the shots, so to speak, while you were there.
So we did, like, what would happen is after feeding and health checks, we would go and before we would go down and start hosing everything down, we would call our supervisor. So our supervisor would, like, we'd have like a, you know, maybe 5-10 minute call each day going over anything that like happened, and you know, getting advice on anything we needed advice on. You know, obviously if there was something like really, I don't know, awful that happened, like, you know, we would get permission to call a vet or do whatever needed to be done. But ultimately, yeah, no, it was the 2 of us. And I mean, I can't remember if I told you this, but there was one time on a weekend where so we did PM checks. So there was the AM where 2 of us were there, and then the afternoon, one of us would come back. We'd take turns, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. And so for the afternoon, it was literally one of us checking all of, like, on everyone and giving out medications. And there was one weekend in particular where there was a monkey who just kept having a prolapsed uterus. And I was directed on the phone by my supervisor how to manually adjust her prolapsed uterus which I had never done before, knew really nothing about. But like basically I had to get this monkey using the transport, get her to the squeeze, and then like secure her in the squeeze to manually, you know, fix her uterus. Something that, like, you know, again, keeping in mind I'm what, 21 years old. No, so I mean that's the level of supervision that would be taking place. And again, I guess like I say this not to, you know, I'm the last person who's gonna kind of criticize individuals when it comes to this. Like, I know that there's just like part of this whole situation is this system of these, you know, the interests of these animals are never going to be put first. And what that means is, you know, their level of care is never going to be even remotely exceptional. Like, that's just not, you know, not what is going on in this industry, despite what they want us to think.
Absolutely. And I think that all of us, it's interesting though, that I think all of us have come to a place where we have accepted and digested the fact that their best interest isn't at heart. What I find unbelievable that is that it seems like the humans caring for them, there was no interest in that either, which is exactly why we're here, because we started talking about this in the light of the vilification that goes on for all research workers in that, and we do believe that, you know, that the probably 99.9% get in to help, and because they love animals and they want to help humanity, and unfortunately they end up victims in a sense. I don't want to use victim as an overused word, but you know, victim of PTSD and having to deal with all of these things while a lot of the public still vilifies them, I guess is what I'm saying. Yeah. So thank you for that. Scary, very scary. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, not at all. And yeah, I'm gonna actually, I'll talk a little bit more about that actually in this presentation, because it's something I've started incorporating more into my outreach, is trying to talk about the workers and the reality that most who get involved, I mean, obviously I don't have like percentages, but many of the people I've talked to who have worked in labs, they are, or even like other places of exploitation, you know, zoos, circuses, animal agriculture, like people are not getting involved because they like to harm animals. That's not, you know, generally speaking, that's not how things work, especially, you know, in labs. A lot of people, they love animals and they're like, wow, this is a chance to work with them. And they just don't really realize what this entails. And, you know, and part of that is just that we live in a society that has so deeply normalized not just violence, but violence towards animals, to the point that we don't even see it as violence. You know, like people are trying to argue that something humane is happening in these labs, that these animals are, you know, getting some sort of needs met, and people actually believe that. And, you know, and I'm not, you know, I'm not judging them for that, because if you've got this industry that has so much sort of like, they get to be put up on a pedestal and say like, look at all of these regulations, but like, you're not going to really sit down and look at the regulations. So you're just going to hear them say, look at all these regulations, and say, wow, they must have a lot of regulations. And so it's just, it works in their favor. And I think there's other things that work in their favor, which I'll get to. So basically, this was another piece of artwork that actually a colleague brought to life for me, because it's kind of been this, sort of represents how I feel about my experience. When you work in an environment where life is just, let me try again. When you work in an environment where life is viewed as disposable, you either start to believe it's true or dissociate and emotionally shut down to survive. And as you know, I did the latter. I mean, a lot of people are like, why didn't you leave? Or when did you leave? Well, I didn't leave because I felt what was going on was wrong. I left because I was graduating and it was time for me to go. It wasn't that I wanted to stay. I I also didn't want to leave because I was afraid that other people would, they might hire other people who care less about the monkeys. So, there's still this level of compassion that is there for caretakers, even in a situation like this, where it's like, well, can I just help at least make things better for them? And obviously systems are complicated. Like, you're still contributing to a problematic system when you're doing that, but at the same time, like, you can see, or hopefully some people can see, why someone like me would say, like, I feel torn about leaving. Like, I know how much I care about them, but the next person, who knows? On the left is the going away, leaving thank you present that was given to me when I graduated. It says, "Thanks, Maddie, from all of your friends at Harlow Primate Lab." I don't know who any of these monkeys are. I don't know if they were alive or not when I was there. I don't know if they're still alive. I mean, it's a pretty haunting image, like series of images, especially because these are supposed to be like good images, right? Like, these are supposed to be like what they feel comfortable putting out there. And it feels like you're looking at ghosts, in my opinion.
Do you still have that, Maddie? Do you still have that? Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I don't have it like on display, but I have it. I don't know what to do with it. I just kind of keep it. It's this like haunting memory of this part of me that sometimes I don't even like, I'm like, did this happen? Was this real? And so I have it next to this quote by Dr. John Gluck, who, if you aren't familiar with, I recommend getting familiar with. He wrote Voracious Science and Vulnerable Animals. He was a former primate scientist. Sorry, I'm having trouble with words. Primate scientist. He actually worked under Harry Harlow and at Harlow Primate Lab long before I did. But he has been a very like influential individual in my life, a mentor, and has just, put into words so many things that I have had trouble articulating, like this. I don't think I have ever escaped the monkeys' faces. I want to be reminded about how inconsiderate I could become as a human being, so devoted to my own success and losing touch with the rest of the world around me. And I think what he's describing here, it's obviously relevant to animal research, but I think it's just relevant to like who humans are and how easy it is to sort of get lost in something to the point that you're not really thinking about how it's going to impact other living beings, whether they're humans or non-human. So I was officially diagnosed with PTSD in 2019. I had definitely thought that I had it before then, but I kind of was just like avoiding it for a while, because when you avoid mental health issues, that goes well. So eventually things got pretty bad. I finally was like, I need to do something about this. And so started kind of confronting that and, my crippling anxiety and, in a better place now, but it's still a thing. There's days that are still really hard. But it has definitely, having access to mental health care, finding the right therapist, saved me. And it kind of also helped me. After I left the lab, I went on to do lots of different internships and work experience at different sanctuaries and wildlife rehab centers. And so I was, on my way of becoming this animal activist, but it also has just really helped kind of doing this alongside working through my mental health, because it's just helped me to take other steps to kind of rectify what has happened. Which leads me to 2 lawsuits that I'm currently plaintiffs on. The first one, I am actually suing the my alma mater, the University of Wisconsin. They have censored me. They have admitted to censoring me on their social media platforms as a result of what I've been saying about my experiences working in the lab. I'm being represented by the Animal Legal Defense Fund, by the way, for those of you who know of them. The other thing we discovered during this is that not only was I personally being censored, but the university has blocked word lists. So there's like Instagram's on the left that you're looking at right now, and Facebook is on the right. And these lists can change at any time. So like this was when we first did the FOIA request, where we basically asked for these open records and found that most of the words that are automatically blocked have to do with animal testing. And
Maddie,
so if you
Maddie, so the FOIA, that's a freedom of information, correct? Because it's just a different acronym here in Canada. So I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, it's basically because they're a public institution, public university, we were able to FOIA request this. And so what it means is, like, on their Instagram, for example, if you went and said, you know, hey, UW-Madison, stop torturing monkeys. Well, torturing's on this list. So what would happen is you would see your comment and UW-Madison would see your comment, but no one else would. So you would think that you had put something out there into the world, not knowing that no one else is going to see it. And it's like, you're just kind of shouting into, I don't know, like the abyss. So this was pretty wild to discover, because it really effectively suppresses public discourse about animal testing.
Absolutely.
And what's even more wild about it is that we went on to discover that the National Institute of Health is also doing it. So I'm a plaintiff on this lawsuit as well. And it really is similar. It's that, you know, the NIH has a blocked word list made up almost entirely of words related to animal testing. And they're like the major funder of animal testing. So it's like, how can you argue that this is not a huge free speech violation when it's our taxpayer dollars that are contributing to this? So if you want to learn more, especially about the kind of law parts of this, like why there's a case and all of that, I recommend our Hen House. Well, it's the Animal Law podcast, which is part of the Our Hen House podcast. They featured me and my lawyer. And it really goes into detail about that. And it's also great because they provide an actual transcript if you'd rather just like read through and kind of learn that way. And at the end of this, I'll put links to everything in the chat. So I will pause there for just a second to see if there's any questions before I kind of get to sort of my conclusion. I call it like what I've learned, but it's sort of like my conclusions about moving forward and how we can advocate for these animals and bring an end to animal testing, change these systems, that kind of thing.
Wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions before Maddie goes on? And forgive me if I miss you as we go on. That was incredible. And I can't imagine walking into a place with 500 animals and being responsible for that. And also even the enrichment. So the enrichment was simply just giving them a snack, like the enrichment. I know I'm sounding.
No, I mean, in some cases, yes.
Yeah, it's just so unfathomable that
it was, like some of their daily enrichment, like what they would get every, like Monday through Friday, was like midday, they would get what the equivalent to a quarter of an apple is. So like some days it would be grapes. So they might get like a little bunch of grapes. Another day it might be a quarter of a pear. So that's one example. The ice was another example. They get that once a week. And then the other main example would be the like plastic feeder type things. I need to add photos to this presentation. I keep forgetting to do that. Basically, like you might see like this plastic ball that you can clip to their cage, and then in it you'd put like popcorn and cereal mix, and then they'd be able to like pick it out, and they'd get that on Fridays before the weekend. And it would last them like maybe 20 minutes. I mean, none of this occupied them the way that these animals should be occupied.
Right. Yeah.
And so some of them who had stereotypical behaviors like over grooming and like just like tearing out their own hair or something, they might get those plastic feeders, like they might have them every day and get them filled like once a day or twice a day. But for the most part, I mean, the enrichment was nothing impressive. They'd hear music sometimes. We'd play music for them. We'd push in these really old TVs and put like Disney movies on. But the thing is, with like that, for example, the monkeys were interested in seeing what was going on the screen. But when you have two cages, like the cages were like this, right? So you've got like the monkeys facing each other.
Okay.
And then you put at the end the TV. They can't even like really see the TV because of the angle.
Right.
So it's like, I mean, you know, it was all just sort of ridiculous. Sometimes they had like some chew toys, specific monkeys did, or, you know, but they, you know, nothing that was, yeah, nothing that was really great for them. And especially because a lot of them lived alone, which in and of itself is just so deeply cruel. But you know, all a researcher had to do was say, like, it would be better for my study if this monkey lived alone. And then they'd be like, okay, check. And, you know, that's that. So
what about any sort of exercise or anything like that? Was that not happening at all?
You get to go to the pool.
I mean, they can't, they can't, yeah, they can't exercise. I mean, in the group housing, there's a little more room for them to like run a few steps, but I actually witnessed a lot of them in those single cages just doing like somersault type things, like, but stereotypical behavior because they're just kind of losing their minds.
Right.
Yeah. So no, you can't exercise, you can't, you know, even though we're trying to mimic foraging, you know, it's like that was something in the wild they'd spend hours and hours doing a day, and that is not even close to what's going on in there.
Yeah. Horrible.
Yeah. And I forgot to mention, in case you're wondering, both lawsuits are in the motions for summary judgment phase. So to be determined what comes of it, what comes of them.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So some of my conclusions and thoughts based on all of my experiences. So we are so desensitized to violence at this point that many people won't hesitate to defend animal research. Something that is really so cruel that if you were to truthfully describe what was going on to a child, they'd be horrified. And I think this is an important point to make because, you know, this is why we have a society that's like, oh no, there's so many regulations, it's fine. Like, you know, we have to on some level realize like how well these industries have done, whether it's, you know, animal testing or animal agriculture, to make us think that something very different is going on than what is actually going on. As with other animal rights issues, the exploitation of animals in labs doesn't just harm animals. You know, I'm a prime example of that. And it's something that I think a lot of people don't think about is really how the people, especially who start working in these situations because they love animals, how that ends up impacting them. It's interesting for me to think about what would have happened when I started kind of sharing my stories on social media and tagging UW-Madison and kind of got on their radar if they hadn't reacted so quickly by like untagging me and then like blocking me, what would have happened? Because as soon as they started doing that, I was like, oh, like they really don't want to hear what I have to say. Should probably keep talking. And that led to so many different people starting to reach out or share their own stories, which is incredible.
I can get more.
Hey, Dad. My parents are on this and clearly not muted. Yeah, hi, Mom. All right, so anyway, here is, meet my parents. Here is a quote by somebody who discovered me on Instagram through some of my posts. And she had written, I also developed PTSD, OCD after resigning from, and then I took out the name of the lab at this point because she's not like out there in terms of speaking out at this point. And was in huge denial about it until recently. Reading this makes me feel so much better since it confirms the toxicity and stress that type of research environment can breed. It takes a lot of energy and strength to share a story like this. And just a reminder to everyone that everyone we meet is fighting something we know nothing about. So just be kind always. Another former primate lab worker reflected on their time. Working in a lab was a nightmare, from which 10 years later, I'm still recovering. Labs don't want you to know what I know, saw, felt, and still feel. They do not want to address the pain and suffering they cause. Excuse me. They are afraid to acknowledge that they've built a system that allows them to do horrible things to animals without repercussions. They cause unimaginable suffering because there are no suitable laws or regulations in place to protect those whose voices are deliberately suppressed. You deserve to know the truth. And yeah, one of the actually like best things, in my opinion, that happened from this, aside from like all of these different people coming through, is that somebody that I used to work in the lab with actually reached out to me when I started talking. We had never talked about it together in the lab because you didn't do that. We all we all know, again, like if you bring up anything that sounds too animal rights, what that could imply, and how soon they'd probably get rid of you. And so I had no idea that there was someone I was literally working with that was struggling. So it has just kind of further showed me that the animal research industry is most threatened by lab workers. Like we are the ones who have been on the inside and can share what is actually going on. And, that being said, we should really be working to build relationships with these individuals and reach out to them with compassion and not judgment, especially, in the animal rights movement. There unfortunately is a lot of demonizing that happens of lab workers and other people who work in exploitative, like in industries that exploit animals, but lab workers especially, I would say. And I think it's like we need to start setting a precedent in organizations as well as in our social circles to stop encouraging that. Because the language we use matters and lab workers see it. I see it. I am still like, the things that people have said to me, the things that I see people saying about people who have worked in labs. I mean, it's like they're literally acting like we're a different species, like this, like like the species of monster. Like there's no compassion that could ever exist. And that is just, you know, plain ignorant, honestly. It's not to say that every person who works in a lab is going to be like me, who comes out on the other side and dedicates so much of their life to trying to stop this. But, you know, if we're trying to make this world a more just place, we're not going to achieve that by demonizing people. Like, we just aren't. And so I did include examples here of, and I had so many to choose from, unfortunately, but of things that people are either saying to me or are saying on posts that I've created, or on posts that other organizations have created about lab workers. This is the language that is going around, that like, if somebody is coming out of an animal lab and thinking, hey, I might not be super into this anymore, like, I wonder, like, what, you know, I wonder if I'm starting to be an animal activist. And then they see something like this and it's like, you know, where do you go from here? If the animal research industry is going to start to ostracize you, and now the animal protection and like field is ostracizing you, it's just like, it's horrible. So, you know, workers is such a sweet word. They literally torture animals, F every single one of them. There is no punishment great enough for all of these people. Why is this allowed? These humans need the death penalty. This was to me. Stop lecturing people and stop using vegan hashtags. You are wasting my time. I think you really support the industry. And this one, animal liberation activists who have always known better and never would have allowed themselves to be indoctrinated and institutionalized or ever sold out to these evil industries will never be as cruel and unreasonable as those who have and do. Animal lab workers can cry me a river. They are sellouts and are going to have to pay for the choices, as all choices have consequences. They better learn to make better and wiser ones that serve the greater good of all, if they're at all concerned about anything other than their measly human existences and their paychecks. So
unbelievable. It's unbelievable, really.
I mean, it's just like, oh, were you born perfect? Have you never done anything wrong that harms anyone? I mean, it's the pedestals people put themselves on. It's like, a lot of people don't realize that we live in an imperfect world. And there is just, you know, we can strive to do the best we can. And some of us can do better, like a lot better. But, you know, you're never going to achieve this sort of like, you know, I'm so perfect, you should all be like me. And what does this do? Who would read that and go like, I mean, what are you doing with this? Are you just trying to make yourself feel better? So I just,
I have a question.
What?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, I mean, for me, like videos I've seen, and it's mostly related to dogs, but you've seen like people that are like shoving or throwing these dogs back in cages.
Yeah.
You know, and there's no like kindness in the way they are handling the dogs. And so when I think about that, like, those people make me mad. I mean,
Yeah.
they, you know, and I realize I do believe, any people going into that think they're going to help and make a difference. But then when you see the stuff like where they're treating the animals so cruel, when it would be, they could just put the dog back in the cage, but they're like throwing the dog back in the cage, you know? And so like I have a hard time because of that kind of stuff. Like, and I know like, because, you know, there's a few people that do that, but probably not all of them, but that's what the world sees. You know, how do you, I don't even know where I'm going with this, but like that's.
Well, I mean, I'm not telling you at all to not be angry. Like I'm the first person who will admit how angry I am when I see this. because it's not, you know, yes, like how can you do this to an individual? But at the same time, like when you've been in a system that is over and over again kind of like basically breaking down your humanity, it's kind of scary what you can do. And I'm not saying like, you know, like when I'm saying like try to meet people with compassion as much as possible, it's not like accept their actions or like support them. It's, you know, we can be angry and we can try to make change without saying like the action I'm going to take as a result of this is saying fuck all of you guys, like you deserve the death penalty, because that's not going to accomplish anything. That's not going to liberate the animals. And that's my point here. It's not that like, you know, it's not to like make light out of some of these horrible videos. It's like, what actions can we actually do to make a difference? Because I think commenting things like this is actually making everything worse. The more animal activists separate themselves from people who have been in labs and make it so even someone who hasn't done stuff like that sees these comments, they're going to say they're talking about me. Like I've never done anything like that where it's like shove an animal into a thing, but I still see these comments and go like, why would anyone, you know, want to interact with us? And so my point is that like, while I think footage like this is helpful to like show what's going on, you know, I think organizations could do a better job of monitoring the conversation and figuring out how to say, you know, this is what's going on. We are not going to accept you saying XYZ because that's actually not helpful. And what we are going to do is be like, hey, what I want you all to do is go and contact your legislators and talk to them about the like XYZ, because that's actually going to get us somewhere. So that's, I mean, it's like, be angry. I'm angry too. Like I'm, you know, but it's, and part of it as well is, you know, not putting yourself through more than you need to be put through. I purposefully do not follow accounts that show a bunch of those videos because, I mean, one, I know what's going on, but two, it's like, what does being perpetually angry like that in a way where like you lose that sort of ability to think rationally at all do for us or do for the animals?
Yeah, I have to watch what I see. You know what I mean? Like, you can only see that so many times. So I don't but I've seen it and it's hard. And I think so many people see that stuff that is their, I'm not saying it's me. I'm with you. Like we need to legislate and do stuff like that. But I think people see that and that's their like view of all lab workers. And it's,
I know.
Yeah.
You know, it's such an interesting, and thanks for that, Kathy, because I think that that's exactly what people see. And then, and, you know, then we get comments because we're leaning towards being compassionate to the workers and, you know, we're supposed to be advocating for the animals, but I think you can do both. And that's what I like. This is such a human psychology situation, almost, this whole conversation and this whole town hall, because I think that's what we've forgotten possibly, and somebody can argue this with me, absolutely, but somehow we've lost the ability to hold more than one thing in our brains. We've all kind of as a whole gone to one end or the other, but you know, I think it's just we've got to work towards holding the fact that yes, we're mad at the system and we want to, you know, we want to advocate for animals and we want to advocate for non-animal use in research, but we can also hold at the same time, without being hypocrites and without contradicting ourselves, compassion for humanity. And if we can get to that balancing act, then that's how the people who do shove the animals in will change. And the funny thing too is that people end up becoming what we call them. And I saw that while working right? I saw that while working in jail for all those years, is that so many inmates would say, well, I got told I was horrible by my parents my whole life. I just decided to act horrible. That's what they expected of me. So I try to see it from that point now, where it's like, I don't even want to focus on you. Maybe if we just educated the public, educated those workers, educated our our legislators and said, please do this, that's the way to go. But it's just a very hard balancing act. And I'm with you, Kathy, because who wants to see that? And I don't know if anyone is speaking from the Canadian standpoint. I'm sure that everyone's seen the ITR videos when that undercover video came out years ago, and just the horrific way in which they were treating the animals. And yet the majority of Canadians don't even know that there's animal testing in Canada. And yet that was a huge story. So anyway, I could talk on, but nonetheless, Laura, I see you have your hand up. So sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you.
Thank you. Thank you. I have some other things to say, but I'll wait till the end. Can you hear me okay? Is my volume okay?
Yes.
Okay, so my camera is off because my internet connection is terrible, and my face will freeze in embarrassing facial expressions. So but I just wanted to jump in on this point. I'm thinking of here in the province of Ontario, in Toronto, we have the Ontario Science Center. And I remember going there, and there was a study done back in the 70s. This is not allowed anymore to do this type of study, but they took people they put them in a prison situation. And they said, you're going to be the prisoners and you're going to be the guards. Mm-hmm. And it was a way to see, just by the environment that they were in, how violent they got. So yes, let's get mad at the individual who is an a-hole for doing that. But let's also get mad at the entire system for raising us this way, for feeding us these narratives, for developing these industries that is creating these people, right? Yeah. Because these people are being desensitized to the violence. Yeah. And so these people who think they've been born perfect and that they've known all along are not looking at the bigger picture, that this is a huge systemic problem that we have in our culture, in many cultures, that we treat animals this way. That is what we need to go after. And we can't go after, just food for thought about that study, environment, bigger system. Oh, and a quote, I believe it's from Maya Angelou, is when you know better, you do better. When you know better, you do better. So yeah, anyway, I'm going to lower my hand now. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'd argue that some of these people who think they know better could do better. I mean, it's completely a systemic issue. It's something that, sorry, I don't know if that was really noisy. Some people will never know what it's like to work in an environment like that, and that's very lucky for them. That's very great. I think, when it comes to like animal agriculture, a lot of people end up in, slaughterhouses and factory farms, definitely not because they want to be there, but it may be their only option for paid employment. Many of them are undocumented. It's a mess. The case of animal research can be a bit different. However, when I think about myself, I was a pretty I was a young, impressionable person who didn't know what I was getting myself into. And that's a great person to have in an environment like that, because you can just start to mold them. Yep. And and that's, again, that's why I think that this work especially should be sort of like a trauma warning, because people are get into that really young, and it has lasting impacts. I mean, it's been like a decade now, and I am still dealing with the results. So yes.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mary. Sorry, I'm just reading what you're saying there, Mary. It's astonishing, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I mean, the first injection that I gave to a monkey. Okay, so here's real quick story. When we're trained to give them injections, we would give them either intramuscular shots or subcutaneous injections, like if they needed fluids. So when I was first trained to do that, I was initially trained with like a syringe that just had like, clear fluid, and to insert it into a tomato, I believe, because the tomato skin is kind of like how a muscle would feel. And I was so nervous because in front of me was also a monkey who was, what is the word I'm trying to say? Sorry. Sedated. There it is. A sedated monkey was laying in front of me, and we were first doing it in the fruit and then supposed to do it like to the macaque. And I was so nervous that I stabbed myself with the sterile needle, like before I even got it like practiced on a macaque. And so I was never retrained. The next time I gave a monkey a shot, I believe one of my coworkers was watching me, but it was on like a non-sedated, very, very awake monkey. So, I mean, again, that's another example of the training and the supervision that we had.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
Everybody else, everyone's okay for Maddie to go on? I think so.
All right. I've only got a few more slides. I mean, I can also wrap up whenever, but yeah, I mean, this kind of ties into what we were saying, is that, animals in laboratories, like getting them out of laboratories. I know that we come at this a lot from an animal rights perspective, right? But I think we also need to really consider the fact and be talking about the fact that wasting billions of dollars on animal research impacts social justice and human rights and public health as well. Not only is this practice of confining and exploiting animals in labs a crime against humanity, in my opinion, so too is the fact that we claim it's to benefit humans when we know perfectly well that these funds would radically change human lives at a rate much higher than anything else that comes from vivisection at this point.
And Maddie, may I say as well that from a health perspective in humans, the fact that the physiological difference between humans and animals and the success rate, I mean, there's a 95% failure rate in using animals. And not only that, because the physiological differences are so apparent, we're missing cures for Alzheimer's, for MS. We're missing those because they're getting passed by the inaccuracy of the results from testing on animals.
Absolutely.
No sense.
Yeah. And, outside of what, animal research sets out to do in terms of finding like cures to certain things, we also don't acknowledge what already exists that can radically transform human lives literally the minute that funding is given to that. So this is this number is for the United States government. United States government spends $14 to $16 billion a year on animal experimentation. And I like to just invite people to imagine the world we'd live in if these billions were spent on homes for the houseless, ensuring that everyone has access to healthcare, health insurance, therapy, and medications, food justice and hunger relief, supporting teachers in schools, community care projects. I mean, the CDC will come out and say, we know that like what's most important, you know, when it comes to like shrinking like health gaps and things like that, it's like it's housing, it's clean water, it's access to good education.
Yeah.
And yet what are we funding? You know, really, like, why is it that animal experimentation gets to come out with like basically nothing, but gets all this money? And then all of these things are looked at as like not exciting or magical enough to invest in. And then it just kind of brings you to this question of who are the people we are actually trying to help? You know, who are the humans that we are trying to help when it comes to, you know, what we are spending money on? Because clearly it's not these individuals, you know, it's not the people that are struggling so much to get mental health, you know, like therapy, for example. This was something I had done, I don't know, a while back now, but in the bottom left, you're seeing examples of funding that came to UW-Madison. And for one of the studies, they were given $3.5 million to do this study, to study extreme anxiety in females, which translates to inducing extreme anxiety into female macaques. I have extreme anxiety. I don't know why they're not studying all of us women who have extreme anxiety. Who could volunteer and actually give consent. But anyway, I thought it would be interesting, like, because I know, you know, I know the power of therapy. I know what it did for me. And I also know that when I found the right therapist, I would have never been able to be able to see her if it hadn't been for my parents being able to help me afford to see her. And so I did some math to basically like think about, okay, like what would this money do? Like, how would it help women with anxiety if we kind of divided it up and gave them access to therapy? So let's just like kind of pretend on average therapy is $100 per hour, one time a week. Obviously that varies everywhere, but that comes out to $5,200 for the year for one person. And so when you divide that into this $3.5 million, that comes out with 672 women in this case with extreme anxiety who would have access to therapy that they probably don't have access to. And I just think that it's like more of this needs to be looked at and pointed to, because I think a lot of the research that's being done is just because like they get to publish things and get money and then it like looks special, when in reality, like, if we really want to help humans, people like, it just shouldn't be a question. Everyone should just have access to therapy and healthcare and clean water. That's what we need to be investing in. So I've just got like 2 more slides here. Another thing that I think is an important yet maybe not that obvious point is that an alternative to testing on animals is actually not testing on animals. We don't have to come up with like, I mean, it's great that people are coming up with like alternatives, but it doesn't have to be like the alternative or testing on animals.
Right.
It can be alternative testing on animals or just not testing on animals, because we don't have a right to use someone else's body without their consent.
I love that.
That is just, you know, a little tangent I like to go on, because, you know, the reality is that deciding that another species is less intelligent or less sentient than the human species is inherently flawed and unscientific, as we can only truly understand the human perspective. So a fish, a mouse, a chicken, a dog, a monkey, they're all intelligent and sentient based on their own species needs. Exploiting another species isn't about humans scientifically deserving greater moral consideration. It's about creating digestible but poor excuses for why human pleasure and human life are valued more than the interests of the other species. So therefore, humans disregard the interest of other species simply because we consider our viewpoint of their worth scientifically and biologically accurate, when in fact, our perspective can never truly be objective.
And I would argue, Maddie, too. I would argue that based on our our past comments that they're not even considering human health anyway. It's
Oh
not,
yeah,
right?
no, I mean that's a whole nother yeah. But yeah, if we're truly being honest with ourselves, we exploit and kill other species not because they are scientifically lesser than, it is simply because we can. And you know, I think these are all kind of points that we need to consider when we are addressing this industry and addressing people who support this industry, who work in this industry, because it's not, you know, if we want to achieve animal liberation, get animals out of labs, make this world a more just place for humans as well, all of this is tied in.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I've got.
Well, that was amazing, and I love what you've got, and that is just exactly as a charity, as a nonprofit, that's exactly, you know, our stance on things. We want to get animals out of labs in Canada and elsewhere. And we do want to advocate for non-animal testing, of course. But not at the cost of the humans involved. You know, we don't want to spend our time hating and vilifying. We just want to get the animals out, and we do believe that it is safer for both humans and animals in general, and as a social issue, that animal testing does not go on. It's just such a bigger picture than just one thing, right? And
Yeah.
Kathy, I thought I saw your hand, so I'm just going to call you out right now. Maybe I was mistaken, but I don't know.
No, I'm wiggling my fingers.
Okay. I thought I saw the hand, so sorry.
But I was gonna look up your Instagram account, Madeline, and stuff, but will all that be put like in an email later?
I can put, yeah, when I send an email, what we'll do, just so everybody knows, and we don't always get to it super quickly, but we should. And now I'm just going to stare at the little beagle on Mary's lap because I can't handle it. Anyway, what we'll do is what we do for everybody is we send an unlisted YouTube. So it's unlisted. It's just for the people who registered and or showed up for the town hall. And then we'll put all the resources in an email, which will include that. Yeah. And then go from there. So yeah, we can do that.
Right.
And even some of your links, well, yeah, exactly what you're putting in the chat, Maddie, will go, we'll go from there. Yeah.
Yeah, the link tree pretty much has everything, and that's also on my Instagram. And then I actually gave, very similar to this, as I said, I don't have like a script written out for most of it, but I gave a very similar presentation on Tuesday, and it's actually live on YouTube. So if there's anyone you want to share like a version of this with, that's, you know, that you want public, that exists too.
Perfect. And eventually we will do a public, but we like to give everyone who's attended an opportunity first, and also to say that they don't want to be on it so that we can, you know, edit them out, of course.
Yeah.
So that said, does anyone have any further comments or questions? Since I know we're hitting, well, I'll just say 9 o'clock in my time zone. So I know there's time zones here, but just I know people have things, sometimes other things, or sometimes we don't go as long. So, but that was amazing. Yeah, that was just really fantastic, Maddie.
Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, somebody has their hand, but
Laura.
Oh, Laura, go ahead.
Maddie, like, honestly, I was nervous about coming because I knew that this was going to be difficult for me. I knew that it was going to be triggering. I see a lot of the, like, I understand a lot of the things that you talked about, being young and trusting that those university higher up management workers are going to have you in their best interest, and wanting to people please and please a higher up authority. And I just saw so much of my younger self in what you described. And so even just that, not even, and then, you know, talking about the animals on top of that, So, but I'm glad I came, of course, because knowledge is power. And just thank you. And I will start following you on Instagram and spread your word. So thank you very much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, on that note, I'm going to wrap it up because I don't see any more hands, but yeah, that was quite the layered discussion, and that's what it's all about. It's never one thing. And that this whole presentation really said that, Maddie, that it's very layered. And I think there's a lot in this whole discussion for so many of us. And I've said a billion times to people that I was in corrections for a long time, and it's the same thoughts, because I too have seen people come in to that job at 20 years old, and even in 5 years, I'm looking at a different person. And the reason I had to leave is because I literally saw myself desensitized and not being able to explain to civilians. I would explain something to a civilian and they were like, how are you not in shock? And it would just be like another day at the job. And so so there's so many layers to the whole thing. But of course we're here for the animals, and that's who we are advocating for. And hopefully in the process, we can help the rest of humanity and society while we are doing that. So thank you so very much for sharing your story and your personal parts to it, which is very brave of you for doing this. So thank you. It's an honor. Yeah. Thank you so much. And thank you all for being here as usual. We will get you the links as soon as possible. Yeah, thank you. And hopefully you'll join us for our next event that will be coming up next week. And follow Maddie as soon as possible.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Everyone have a great evening and a great weekend. Thank you all.